Hello and welcome to On the Road to DevOps. Every so often, I've just got to kvetch a bit and I call my buddy Bryan and we get together. I spend my life as a software architect, as an engineer, trying to solve problems with software. Bryan, how do you spend your days?
I write code and I try to help other people write code better.
Oh, there you go. You and I together often invite somebody to spar with us, depending on what the topic is. And today we've invited James Brookbank. Thank you, James, for joining us. Hey, how do you spend your day?
I help people build clouds.
Clouds.
Like with vapor chambers?
Sure. Like
Okay.
actual clouds. A little bit technology clouds. So I know I'm a solution architect. So I help people build private clouds, public clouds, all sorts of cool clouds with little bit of reliability on top.
There you go. A little bit of reliability.
That's pretty cool.
So, James, thank you for agreeing to kind of belly up to the bar with us tonight. Before we really jump into the topic, I got to ask you, what are you drinking?
I have a wavelength IPA.
Okay.
I
All
love
right.
the Lambda.
Oh. And how about you, Mr. Finster? Is this one of those posh nights for you?
It is not. I'm feeling a little bit under the weather today, so I'm drinking a piping hot coffee.
That is interesting because before we started, I was telling James, I too am sans alcohol. I, in fact, have my virgin gimlet tonight. That's right. I've got this sparkling lime with a little bit of lime juice in it. So sparkling lime water, because I'm just fighting something and I just don't want to take the extra little bit of alcohol. So, so Bryan, I hope you don't come down with anything, but we'll take it easy tonight on you. Well, maybe we will. Maybe we won't. Let's see what happens next.
I'm still scrappy.
You're still scrappy. You're still scrappy. And James has seen you be scrappy. You know, the reason that we wanted to get together tonight is to talk about ops. I have my own opinion on ops. I think it still exists. We've been discussing SRE and DevOps and dev teams and who'sies and what's it. Question. Just going to start out with this question and then let's meander through a conversation. Is ops still alive or is it dead?
Well, the question I have is, what the hell is it? Because every time I talk to somebody, they have some different definition of ops. And so when you say the word DevOps to them, the ops part is the part is already overloaded before they even bashed it together into a portmanteau and say DevOps. And then that gets more overloaded. And so it causes all kinds of confusion. So what the hell's ops?
No. You know that everybody now knows that DevOps doesn't mean technology. It doesn't mean process. It just means culture. I saw that on the internet today. DevOps means culture. It's just like an interchangeable word thing.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. And it also doesn't mean a tool or a job.
I can't believe that. You know,
But we're here to talk about ops. We're not here to go and rehash the whole DevOps. Let's just talk about DevOps.
Let's break apart the phonemes, right? So dev and ops, it was originally thought of that somehow we're going to break down some silos and we're going to get the development team talking to the people who were in charge of the protection of production. That's how I'm going to talk about it for now. That's where
Is that accurate?
I don't know. It's where that's how it. So many years ago, ops were the people who protected production.
Hang on. That's your experience with ops. James and I may have different experiences with ops. And this is the thing, is that all of us have been doing this for a long time. Your experience with ops that's what it was. And in the role of, when Patrick was putting together that whole first DevOps conference, he was his context, that's what ops meant. But ops has never meant that for me ever. What about you, James?
I mean, I think they also did that around the time Agile infrastructure for a while. And that's a very different view of when we say operation. I mean, it sounds a lot more or less glamorous depending on how you feel about it. But there used to be all sorts of teams that would wrap this up. So, you know, your network team was never confused for your Unix team, was never confused for your DBAs. And then we kind of got to 2009 and we're like, oh yeah, it's everyone who's not a developer.
Oh my
And
gosh.
it's like, right, why
There's
did we
truth
do
to
that?
that. There's truth to that, except then you had this whole DBA thing. Like, where were they? Well, they were just on top of the mountain over there, right?
And then you had ops DBAs and dev DBAs.
Yes, you did.
which
Yes,
was
you
weird.
did. It was really.
But that was all formed because instead of having this nuanced framework of different teams,
Mhm.
we found it easier, I think, as an industry to say, we'll just flatten everything into these two things, like devs who do dev and ops who I don't really understand.
Now, see, the context that I've always worked in, we had infrastructure.
Mm.
And then
We-
ops was actually application support. So
Yeah.
they can do the inside. You can shake your head, but that's our context is
Well, we're
different.
disagreeing because our contexts were different. I'm going to shake my head because the infrastructure ops was all of that, but they specialized exactly as James was talking about. We had the guys who were the infrastructure heavies, right? They were the bare metal guys. They were
Wait, hang on.
they unpacked the things off the pallets. Yes.
Let me finish explaining my context that I've worked in.
All right.
Can't disagree with my context. It was mine. Is you had infrastructure teams
Mhm.
and they took care of all the hardware. But then ops was literally nothing but application support. That's all they were. And within the context of, you know, and we'll talk a little bit about this gutter to gutter thing, but in the name of developer productivity, developers shouldn't support the applications they build until it's already a huge dumpster fire, and then we'll call them.
I saw the separation in a bit differently, and it was probably because I had that strange opportunity to be working for the same corporation with my husband in ops, and I was in engineering.
Yeah.
And I worked daytime hours. I worked, you know, on Monday through Friday, and his organization worked in shifts because production was 24/7, but developers were working. They were not working 24/7, and we were not following the sun. We weren't doing anything like that. We were regionalized. This was with AccuWeather many years ago. And operations at that point, right, was the protectors. They had folks who specialized in bringing in the infrastructure. Hell, they were putting the satellite collection systems on the roof in the building. That was kind of fun to see in the snow. Another story for another day. But so we had those folks who actually they put the metal together, they plugged things together, they ran the line, they did those things, they touched
Sure.
them. And we also had other folks who were better with the application support or the systems monitoring that was going on. So they played a slightly different role. We had folks who were frontline help desk. So it's
to James's point, isn't that confusing? But I think we should circle back and explain why it is we wanted to have this conversation. Is because we had there was a couple of articles that came out. One was, DevOps is dead, and their focus was on platforms, which doesn't make a lot of sense because platforms are part of DevOps. But the other one was that this article, was it on InfoWorld? I forget which publication, but it was devs don't want to do ops. But then, the question came up, well, what do you mean? Right. And the issue that that I've seen anyway is where companies go to a conference, the CTO goes to a conference and learns about DevOps, and they hear things like you build it, you run it. And they think that means that the development team needs to own all of their tools, all of their infrastructure, 100% of the support plus development.
But Bryan, in the past, haven't you actually said that early on you did all that? Like, isn't that part of your story that you had all your own tools, you monitored production, you wrote your own stuff, deployed your own stuff? Like, wasn't that a part of your personal history?
No.
Okay.
No, that's not what you build it, you run it means.
No. I'm talking about you personally.
Yeah,
Don't you have a you build it, you run it story?
I do.
Okay.
But I didn't own first level support.
Okay.
Now, first level support was which team needs to get talked to, which team do I need to wake up after I try to run the scripts that team gave me to fix whatever situations there were of, right? So we didn't get bombarded with duh calls or things that we had, workarounds for while we were trying to find the real issues.
Okay.
We got woken up for stuff that first tier support couldn't handle. Now, the first tier support would never touch our code ever, which I didn't want them touching my code. It was, you know, it's our code to break, it's not theirs. And they would get us involved within about half an hour of that call happening, so that we were dealing with an issue before it became a huge dumpster fire. And I've also worked in environments where I was the DBA, which I should, because the database is part of the code. It's not an other, right? But I've never had to handle my own infrastructure, and nor should I. Even if you're in the cloud, I shouldn't be the one out there can manually configure AWS. There should be abstractions for that, so I don't have to learn all of that stuff, right? But I don't want to get woken up at 3 a.m. with like a distribution center that's been down for 2 hours because second tier support couldn't figure it out. I definitely don't want someone mucking with my code and I find out days later. Right.
So I can get behind what you're saying, and it's highlighting that our words are very different.
Yeah.
I still club ops. Infrastructure guys, pardon me, I don't mean to be sexist. Infrastructure humans are still, yes, I will keep correcting myself, they're still part of ops. They're still part of ops. To me, represents production. It represents the final path to production. It doesn't represent the entire pipeline if we're leveraging DevOps capabilities. But I always think of, I still have this, and it's taking me a while to break through that mental model, and even having that conversation with my husband, because we came from that ops is over here, engineering's over there. That's literally how it was. That's how it was organized. And all of the different sub teams or themes or groups that had specialties within that were just within that. We didn't name them separately, Bryan. So it sounds like in your world, you may have named them separately, but
I think that all of us are victims of the org chart. Our perceptions on the org chart, where the org chart is for HR. It's not a best practice. But James, what are your thoughts on it?
I think that's a good way of thinking about it. And I think the bit that often people don't realize is it's very rare that you get to see even a dozen companies in detail, let alone hundreds or thousands. So most of the time you are kind of looking at a very small set of like, well, in my company, it works like this. And the more I talk to people in these spaces and ask them about how it works in their company, the less consistency there is. So like every time you have this idea of like, well, this is what these things mean, and that's going to work in all these different companies, I'm like, there's no real evidence of that. And there's a ton of evidence that most companies have their own very unique org charts, unique roles and responsibilities, some like coherence when it comes to, regulation, like everyone who's got their PCI compliance for cards or something ends up looking a little bit the same. But most of the stuff is very path dependent on where your company's come from and what it looks like and how that's organically grown up over time, basically. So I agree, like that there's still that op concept, but I mean, I use the term a lot now where I'm like, there's really a sort of build element and a run element. And that's often what people mean. Like who runs this stuff is much more accurate than where's operations.
No, I complete agreement. I use the terms runtime, build time and runtime, right? When I'm putting together even visuals folks to understand the models of how we want things to work, we'll create the build time, which is different than the runtime. And all of the accoutrements, all of the roles, responsibilities, they do differ and vary. I would say that you're right that if people have stayed with a corporation throughout their career, I think I have an additional interesting perspective in having spent 2 decades with global consultancies, being deposited in different places, parachuted in, oftentimes having to get the lay of the land. And you're right. You did look at the org chart first, but then I would start seeking out who's the guy who knows network. I need to talk to this guy. Who's the guy who knows this? And yes, I'm saying guy, and I'm trying to, who's the human who knows this, right? Who's the guy who knows XYZ? And the only reason that you delineated ops and dev was more, how did you get access to them? It was how you found your way to get to them. And to your point, more org structure.
Who to call when there's a problem.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, it's who got the pager, although the pagers don't exist in the same way that they used to anymore, but poor ops Always had the pagers.
You know, just funny aside on that, back when I actually carried a real physical pager, we went on a team building canoe trip, but I was on call, so I still had and I was in the boat in the canoe with my manager at the time, and he managed to flip the canoe and the river, and that pager still worked. It was incredibly depressing.
Ah,
So,
Left the chrome and it floated and everything.
no, it was attached to me. So when
Oh,
the
I see.
you know, so
Shame.
let's track back to is the hype around is DevOps dead? Let's talk a little bit more about the ops piece. I kind of want to vector in on the changes to ops first and then track back to is DevOps dead? I've spent a lot of time making sure I can double down on concepts of SRE, not necessarily saying, hey, we're going to all become this latest and greatest verb, this latest and greatest noun rather, but the idea of error budgets, for example, right? Fantastic. Let's invert things and let's make sure that instead of worrying about uptime as 5 nines, let's, give you a budget that says you're going to get more than 5 minutes and 35 seconds over the course of a year to be able to improve. And it's likely that you're going to need that.
You got 5 minutes to improve things over the course of a year?
Yeah. Well, if you're inverting 5 nines, that's how much downtime you get, right? So, where I'm going with that is this concept of SRE, sometimes I find irritating because the statement is that if you take ops, here's the statement. No, you guys can throw some darts at me here in a second. If you take ops and teach them about how to do software engineering, well, then that's what an SRE is. They apply software engineering to operations and go. Is that true?
Yeah. James, you've got way more experience with people implementing SRE anti-patterns than I do, because the only places that I've worked, they've had people called SRE, but what they were was just application support.
So, I think there's a complexity in this space, and I will add a proviso for the internet. Like, I can speak on this on behalf of my company, but I am absolutely not in this scenario. You can read my book if you want more details and like official line on this. But from a personal perspective, I think a lot of times we haven't split out the SRE job role with SRE practices. And there's SRE practices like error budgets or SLOs, like the way that the incident management works, data testing, all those kind of things. They are things that are proven to work in a single company.
Yep.
Google. And, were released on the basis that it might work for other companies. And that's things that, we've seen work in other companies. But it's not intended as a very linear definition of a role. And what's happened in that space is, I think a lot of people have taken the job title SRE. The bit
Yes.
that I find like most valuable about that is this has given a lot of operations people almost a bit of a lifeline. Like, for a number of years, they were basically told, I know you had a job title and you were head of network engineering before, but now you're operations. And it was like, well, hang on, I'm network engineering. And they're like, no, you're operations now.
Yeah.
And now they're like, right, suddenly I have an engineer title back. I can call myself an SRE. And like, that's reclaimed some of, the team credit capabilities, compensation, like in this space for people who were really struggling with this just generic wrapper of operations. So just because some people have taken on that SRE title doesn't mean they're not necessarily doing SRE practices. But
isn't that the same as DevOps? Isn't that the same as the DevOps engineer?
It is. And the moment, great example, right? So, if you feel like, hey, I'm an operations person, I'm applying for a job, and then I just put DevOps on my job application, I'm likely to get a significant additional salary.
Mm-hmm.
The incentives incentivize the people, like, and then when they respond to them, we're all confused. But actually, like, it's a good sign that like the way we're looking at this means it's powerful. So why do people want to do SRE? There's a lot of like strong rationale of saying this is an engineering discipline. And when you look at things with that engineering mindset, often you follow these SRE principles.
Mm-hmm.
It's not meant to say like, oh, we just let the programmers loose on the servers and hope for the best. Like, that's explicitly not the case. Like, so it's mindset, not the skill.
It's also not meant to say that operations, that folks who would have currently may have a title that includes ops or operations, it doesn't mean that they're incompetent or incapable of those things either. It means if they want to apply SRE techniques, then there are certain skills that go along with that. They may or may not have those, the same way that anybody who claims to be a DevOps engineer may or may not have the capabilities and skills that they need to do those things. But I like your point about the compensation, is that one drives me crazy. And I think that there's a lot of merit, and a lot of it shows us that there's a really big void if we are really creating a cast of people that were saying, well, they're ops, and so they're worth like this small amount, and we're going to stress you, and we're going to pressure you, and we're not going to pay you, and you're going to be highly reactive in nature. Does an SRE wouldn't that make you want to turn around and say, hey, this sounds really cool. I want a way to, it's attractive. I was telling Bryan, go ahead.
No, I'm just going to tease Bryan briefly, because I think the reverse is also true, because every so often we have this conversation, we're like, oh, everyone's a developer now. And I'm old enough to remember when not everyone was a developer. And at this point, when you say to people, like, what do you do as a developer? So you cover all this stuff? They're like, oh, I just program. I'm just a coder. And I'm like, so you're a programmer? That's pretty offensive for some people. They're like, oh my gosh, I'm a developer. I'm not a programmer. And I'm like, but if you're just programming and you're not doing architecture or, operations, CD, aren't you just a programmer?
Bryan prefers to say developers are engineers. All developers are software engineers. That's what Bryan says. All developers are software engineers. Oh, we've had this argument before, buddy.
No. All developers should be software engineers. Some are merely coders, right?
So a surprise agreement. Okay.
No. I mean, this is the problem. This is why Dave Farley wrote his last book, Modern Software Engineering. It was a call to action for the coders to level up and become software engineers.
It may take more than a book for coders to level up and become software engineers.
It'll also require incentives, and it'll require people to stop being treated like coders.
And then I'm going to plug one set. Yeah, on Bryan here, like every time we blame the individual, we're doing it wrong. Like it's the incentives that we set, the systems that we build that are encouraging people to do that. So if someone's paid on their feature releases or lines of code, or they're fired for their lack of lines of code.
I didn't mention the incentives were wrong. There's this, it's the whole, again, that whole gutter to gutter thing. I need more lines of code produced. So I need developers to be doing nothing but coding. So I'm going to create a PMO over here to hand them requirements. I'm going to create an application support team over here so that they can throw their crappy code over the wall to application support to support it. I'm going to create a testing team over here because coders aren't capable of writing tests. So we have a testing team to do that so that they'll be more productive. Yeah, I read about this stuff all the time. A software engineer does all of that stuff.
Oh my goodness. It feels like there's so much tension here. No, there is, because I remember I had a name tag that was on my desk that said associate programmer, and I was like, Shazam. But and I was in the engineering department, and that was like the next thing. And like that was not talking down, that was actually talking up. And we were designing and we were doing this thing. So it's interesting journey wise where you would enter the workforce in all of these different names and categorizations probably also has an impact on what you aspire to be, or what you look up to, or what you look down on in all of this, right?
At the last company I worked at, when I started there, the very first role that you could get as an entry level was programmer. And your aspiration was to get promoted to programmer analyst, because that meant that you're capable of doing more than just writing code. And, that's the way that progression went. But
is that the equivalent? Sorry to interrupt you, but like, is that where people in operations are like, maybe if I do this well, I can be an SRE. And so they're building their own hierarchy of.
I hope not. I would hope not in that way.
The titles in the industry have gotten massively inflated, because the highest role you could get in that organization was senior programmer analyst. And then you had to be a manager. But I think we're all touching on something that's really important here, is that the words we use affect the mental models of what we should be doing. Lumping everything that's not development into ops is obviously bad. it makes people feel bad.
Mm-hmm.
You know, James, you hit on it. People want to be called engineers because they're doing engineering work. And they want to
But
feel
does that mean
pride.
anybody who's on the left hand who is more likely to be designing and implementing the code itself for the end user? I'm trying to figure out how to navigate this one to not make it blow up. So is developer a bad term? Because we talk a lot about developers. I know Bryan, you're like, everybody needs to be a system engineer or a software engineer. Yeah, they all need to be it, and they need Dave's book, and they need to watch the videos, and they need to study hard. But aren't we really applying the same thing and saying, well, we shouldn't call all ops people ops because that's like a slam against all the different capabilities that are necessary. I would say the same thing for the other side, lumping everybody and saying that's a dev team or a dev group or a dev organization. It's the same kind of, we are lumping and categorizing. We're either oversimplifying it, right, and making these really massively big buckets, or when I first started to work with Deloitte and work with their offices in India, literally for every 6 levels that we had in the United States, there were 3 levels per level. So there were 18 levels. And but to try and,
first, I don't consider developer to be a pejorative, right?
Some do.
Well, I mean, people should get offended less easily.
Well, then ops.
Well, no, because you need to give people credit for where they live, right? And if you're an infrastructure engineer, right, and you do that really well, you're not ops, right? You're doing some real engineering with hardware over here. But I don't think dev team is actually a good name for it, because it's much more than when dev team makes you think of a typing pool, a very highly paid typing pool, unless they're lowly paid typing pool.
So we're agreeing that both sides shouldn't be overly labeled, and those labels should not be overly simplified.
Well, we should focus on the mental models it causes when we use words. So it's a product team, right? Because a product team delivers business capabilities, not code. Now, I have no problem at all being called a developer. I've been a developer for half my life, right? And I'm fine with that. But it's a dev team, it's a product team where we come together to deliver a product that people want.
And this might loop back into the sort of the DevOps is dead narrative. I think what's been happening a lot in this space is that people have tried to do a lot of cosmetic DevOps transformations and digital transformations and said like, hey, you individuals on the ground, you need to start talking to each other, break down those silos, but haven't made transformative changes to their organizations or their leadership capabilities or fundamentally ways of working. And so if you haven't done all those things, your environment and say DevOps might be dead, because I kind of tried to do this and nothing changed. And the answer was not as simple as just saying, break down this silo and make sure that people speak to each other. It was, you need to make deeper changes in order for those teams to work together.
Does that mean that DevOps is dead, James? Or does it mean, and it's actually a question, because are we saying that all the practices, all the cultures, all the mindset shifting that needs to happen, all of those different practices, is that really dead? Or is what's dead the inauthentic attempt to do that label? Is that
it's
what's
very
dead?
individual? No, it's individual. Like if you're an individual and you've tried this and it failed, it's dead to you, isn't it? Right? If it succeeded for you, it's alive and kicking. So it's very contextual, I think, is what I'm trying to get across. That individuals that haven't seen success and will like to blame the tooling and I mean, the one common theme of all our bad decisions is ourselves, right? So typically
it's Finster. Wrong. It's Finster. Haven't you been following this guy?
Hang on. So, but there's also at the organizational level, DevOps is a buzzword. And to your point, it was stillborn. It's not that it died. It was never born because they didn't do anything other than throw tools at teams or say, now you own your cloud configurations, so now you're DevOps. And my wife and I gave a talk at DevOps Enterprise Summit called The Rise and Fall of DevOps, where it talked about things that you needed to have in place if you were going to, beyond words and that you need to keep in place if you didn't want it to fail. And it's far more than telling teams to deliver faster, right? I mean, we have these structure, mission, ownership, platform, learning, trust. It's all these links that you have to forge that if you don't have these things in place, you'll never get off the ground. You need to focus on building out those links and growing the organization and looking at what do we need to improve instead of why can't you people push code faster?
But I'm going to come back to just pull a couple of things together here. One of them is that I tend to agree with something I think I heard James say, which is why would DevOps be considered dead right now? And it's because concepts, and we're talking about tools, we're talking about pressure to go faster. We're talking about a complete and total focus on development. DevOps often has become a pressure cooker to get delivery teams, to get developers, to get programmers, whatever you want to call them, to get them to move stuff more quickly. And so if we can give them automations, heck, I like the fact that we're adding DevSecOps. I like the fact that we are focusing on automating tests, that we're focusing on dealing with risk and mitigation. But isn't part of it failing, DevOps failing? Isn't DevOps, if we say DevOps is dying, isn't it dying because we didn't really give it a chance? We made it a label. We pushed it out. To your point, I don't know if it's individualized, but isn't it at an organizational level?
Well, I mean, the flip of that is also the success. Like the idea, there are conversations I would have, 10, 12 years ago now about how to do deployments. And they would be nothing like the sort of modern, the sort of post-Phoenix project kind of DevOps, where I'm talking with executives over how they do transformation. Like in some areas, it's been so successful that just the idea when you speak to someone in a company about like there being a wall between operations and development, they're like, no, we've done that. Like we broke down that silo. So it doesn't have to die like in a company because it's like, it wasn't set up as success. It's also been wildly successful in a lot of companies and outlived its like usefulness for the next thing, the DevSecOps, like something else is value stream mapping, SRE, like other things have cropped up to say, hey, we just need to look at that next stage of its evolution. So like if it's like a Phoenix reborn in this space,
isn't this really getting back to the original premise of DevOps and agility? Aren't we doing continuous improvement? And through continuous improvement, we happen to be labeling it. But isn't this all continually building on and improving on, right? Where we are now with SRE concepts, where we are now with DevOps tooling and concepts, where we are now with platforms that enable product teams to build more quickly and with better reliability. Those are all improvements. If you were to tell me about a digital platform, I spent a good bit of time. I was actually brought into Deloitte originally to be their frameworks team lead, their global frameworks team lead, .NET and Java. This is before the entity framework popped up. We were creating frameworks and there was a desire to make things as simple as possible for the developers so it could be more reliable. If you had told me about low code, no code platforms, and I looked at them and I've been following them through the years, where they are now is dramatically different where they were even 3 or 4 years ago, which 10 years ago, I would have laughed at you if you would have said, what we need is a solid platform so the product teams can write more code. I would have said, well, give them entlib, right? Give them their own, their caching blocks and their different pieces and parts. And yes, I'm dating myself now, but I would have said, right, that would be stronger to me than platform. So tracking back, isn't this just an evolution that DevOps is not dead, but it's being rebranded and improved? Isn't operations not dead, but it's being rebranded, improved, allowed to have many different identities that got clumped together?
No, the organizations that are doing well don't talk about DevOps. The organizations that are trying to do well will, and they'll also be looking at how they operate as an organization and look at the outcomes they're achieving and focus on continuous improvement. And then there's the organizations who want a silver bullet and they don't understand what the word means until they get bit because they did it wrong. And then DevOps is dead for them. Right. And, they don't know what ops is. They don't know what a product is. They don't know that they don't look at anything other than, why aren't the team's velocities increasing? But it's,
I don't think it's dead. I think the Phoenix project, let's Phoenix this up. Isn't it being reborn? Isn't DevOps being reborn? Isn't operations, aren't all of these roles?
People are frustratingly failing in the same ways all the time. And you can,
but we've been failing for years though. I'm not just in the last 5 years. We've been failing for decades.
Not failing, just learning.
No,
we've been learning, expensively learning for decades.
We might be learning from them, but we're still like someone's learning.
It's like going to the airport and watching planes crash all the time. And going, why didn't you learn from that?
I'm a big fan of I'll borrow this quote without attribution, but we can see the future. It's just, it's really here. It's unevenly distributed. And I think that the trick in this space is there are so many companies which are doing well in this space, but they don't necessarily talk about it, or it's not badged in the same way. And then there's plenty which aren't. And so that wide variety feels different from 10 years ago when we're all struggling in the same space, but it's widened out. And so, some people are still in 2010 and other people are in 2025. Right?
So I think what we should really be focusing on is the outcomes we expect, right? And this is the problem, is everyone's focusing on the silver bullet instead of these are the outcomes we expect. This is why we spun up minimumcd.org. It's because this is an objective outcome that you can focus on that you honestly can't achieve unless you do some level of improving your organization.
I like that. I like that we're talking and turning it around to let's solve a problem. Let's get after the why. What is it that we're trying to achieve? Less about names, less about monikers, less about titles. Yes, titles matter, especially when you're talking about paychecks, especially when you're talking about promotions, and when you're talking about longevity in your role. Yes, those things matter. And how do we keep our focus on solving the problems together? What is it that we're trying to do? Are we able to deliver software at the speed that our end users need it? Is the delightful experience that they want? Is it dealing with a pain point or providing some net new capability? It doesn't matter if it's commercial, it doesn't matter if it's DoD, it doesn't matter where it's for. Are we solving something together? And yeah, let's use all of these different techniques. Like this is my kumbaya part of the evening, right? This is if we all stop using labels and stay focused on solving problems.
Well, and what it requires is people to actually track the results they're getting and focus on improving those instead of putting structures in place and assuming everything is perfect because I read about that structure at one point, or because that makes HR easy, right? How are we continuously improving our outcomes? Don't focus on all teams doing Scrum. It doesn't matter. None of that matters. What matters is not only can we deliver at the speed our customers need, our end users need, but when things break, we can fix it at the speed required, right? Are we getting those outcomes? Can we do it sustainably, long-term? I tell people all the time, I don't care if you can deliver once. Tell me how you're delivering 5 times in a row.
It's an interesting thing as well, because I think, and we touched on it a little bit here about some of the aspects which are not necessarily the tooling, some which are process, and really some which are people. Like culture is such a critical element of this. And, I have this conversation a lot with people where increasingly I'm asking them to not just do hand wavy things, to stop using the term DevOps and start being more granular in their terminology. So instead of talking about like, hey, we've got a good culture or we need to improve our culture, I'm like, give me some specifics. Let's talk about psychological safety. Like psychological safety is a data-driven term that really underpins a lot of SRE, but I think a lot of DevOps as well, right? Like, in terms of the Western model. So let's talk about psychological safety. Let's talk about how that fits into how you operate, the things you're doing, like you can measure, which are proxy metrics for that. And stop using sort of some terms in this sort of hand wavy, hey, everyone's just going to kind of get along, we'll work it out. No, like, let's talk about the specifics. Let's deconstruct these larger terms, the development and operations, deconstruct them into these smaller items and start saying, hey, what's the specifics here? Like, how do we do that? And And you can't measure everything and manage everything like in ultimately granular ways, but you can have a start. Like you can try, and you can certainly, you know it when you see it. When you work with an organization or you work with a team and they're operating effectively or they're developing quickly, you can kind of feel that, and you can see that loop occurring, that learning loop occurring. So we know we can do this. And I think the ask is like, it's not to kill DevOps or to denigrate the term operations, but it is to say that those terms are too vague for us to use effectively going forward. So let's start using smaller terms that cover specific things. And, you know, my example is my bugbear all the time. People are like, we've just changed our ops team and it's now called SRE. And I'm like, I'm not stopping you. I'm a sign, not a cop, right? Like, I'm just telling you, this probably won't help. Like, you probably should call your SREs SREs. And other people should be called whatever job they're doing, right? Like that's how job titles work. So don't think about this as a panacea.
Exactly. If you call your tools team the platform team and call them all DevOps engineers, it doesn't mean that they're building platforms to make it easier to deliver or actually care about the end user, which is the product teams, right?
Yep.
It's culture and mindset are important, but to your point, these vague hand wavy terms like agile mindset and DevOps and instead of these are the outcomes we need. Are we achieving these outcomes?
But we still need to deal with taxonomy. We still need to deal with this. When I go into a new organization, it happens more frequently than I'd like it to, but that's what I do. One of the very first things that I do is to pulse them, understand what their lexicon is, because it tells you a lot. In addition to, hey, do you have an org chart, right? You look at the org chart, but if you actually start to understand their lexicon, and you'll see exactly the holes. Not every organization has dramatic and terrible lexicons, but if you don't have an agreement on what words mean so that you can get to what is under that umbrella, what is the outcome of applying that mindset, that culture, that process, that tooling, et cetera, and so on, you do have to deal with that. So for us today here in this conversation, it feels as though we need to maybe a call to arms to get more definitions out there or to help people more succinctly.
I don't think getting definitions out there helps because people go, no, that's not the real definition because the real definition, because we just had this discussion about ops, Tracy.
Yeah, but could we at least prompt them to say, these are the things, these are the types of things in identifying how you're going to solve a problem. I guess you're right. As I'm talking this through, the way that I work with somebody,
specific problems to solve.
Right. This is how I work people through the problem normally, is helping to understand their lexicon and then understand what they're trying to accomplish, and then being less worried about their taxonomy unless it is conflicting and worrying about solving the problem.
Yeah. And I think it's important
Go ahead, James.
That we're focused on these are the problems to solve. Use your context to solve these problems. But there's a set of problems you need to solve to get where you're trying to go. So worry less about what you're calling people. Worry and worry more on what are the blockers to solving these problems. What were you going to say, James? I'm sorry.
No, it's actually, it's very similar, I think, in concept. Is the idea of a universal taxonomy is something that's very appealing, I think, to humans. But if you look at what's successful, there's a really good talk on this a couple of weeks ago at SRE Economy from Andrew Schaefer about like language maturity. And I don't mean like programming languages, but it's a similar problem. Every time humans have tried to invent a language from scratch and get people to adopt it, doesn't go well. Like actually language evolution is very powerful because just naturally language is used in different ways. And the most effective languages are those that promote like just the right level of understanding. And what's key, I think, for so many people and companies in this space is you don't need a third party to tell you what something means. You need to use the language internally that works for you, but also feel empowered. You know, if people like Bryan and myself can say like, you should go and do this, like go feel empowered to say, I'm just going to use this term for me. And in my local context, not the global context, I'm a developer, I know how to do this stuff. So in that space,
I know my scopes.
stuff, that's fine. right? And you know, to pull straight back to error budgets, a lot of people ask me like, what's the right error budget for things? And I'm like, that's not how budgets work. There's no such thing as the right budget.
Right.
Like,
What
it's not
is
mean to
your
you.
budget? What is your trade-off?
The budget is the important bit. That's the
Mhm.
crucial bit. It's a transaction between your teams that you then agree on. Whatever that is for you in this space in language terms works for you. Go and do that.
Amazing how hard people work to remove engineering from an engineering field. Because if we could just give hard set definitions, it doesn't require any engineering. Because
Right.
engineering is all about compromise and trade-off.
Well,
But the key of it-
architecture is all about compromise and trade-off. Right? Architectural trade-off analysis is a real thing, right? Engineering and architecture both deal edges of the same thing, right? They are not completely separate items. So I come back to that. You know, you guys have made me happy, proud, frustrated all at the same time. In that, no, it's true. Hey, I'm complex and very flat at the same time. That you called me out on defining a taxonomy, on a universal taxonomy. Bad there, because all that does is
Sounds
propagate
fun.
the problem. It sounds fun,
But
but it
don't-
propagates the problem. But I want to go back to it
Just create
isn't.
another standard.
Hey, you sad person, you. I almost called you that whole sad thing, but then it would sound like I'm sorry. Where I was going with that is we don't need a universal definition. What we need to do is continue to shout out that you need to get your definitions correct. That, Bryan, the first time I ever met you, I think one of the first things that you and I like high-fived about was context. It matters. Your context matters. Your situation matters. Your personnel matter. The humans that you have matter in the way that you're going to solve the problem. So it is contextual. It is observation, right? It is getting in and understanding what you're trying to do, and then forging forward with how you're going to solve it as an organization with the humans that you have. But you're going to have some definitions. To your point, James, you're going to have to get contextual to your organization. You're going to have some definitions that people agree on, because you've got to have a way to refer to something, right?
If you don't do that, what happens in this space, and there's a great essay on this, Joe Friedman, called The Tyranny of Structurelessness.
Okay.
If you like sort of, 19th century feminism, but like it's relevant for this scenario, just trust me. So the idea that you don't have if you don't have this formal structure, you haven't gone through this understanding of what happens in terms of your power hierarchy and dynamics, that somehow that will be flat and everyone will get along and it will work out. That's not true. You've just hidden your structure. And now there's an informal structure that builds in this space, and that power dynamic that occurs. We've all seen that in organizations where they're like, hey, I need to speak to so-and-so to get this done. It's like, no, they won't be able to do it. But hang on, they're the VP of, no, you need to go speak to Bill. Bill has the servers. He'll let them out. Why? And it's because we haven't modeled the real structure, the power structure and dynamics correctly onto the way things we want to work are working. That mismatch in terminology and dynamics is crucial. And every time you think like, well, we gave them a name, but they're not really doing the thing that I think they're doing, you've mismatched the visible structure to that hidden structure in the space. And that's a human thing. Like, you're not going to get away with that when you have humans in place. And even if you don't have any humans, they still design your systems, so they're still there. Does that make sense?
This comes back to architecture, right? I mean, everything circles back to, do we have the appropriate architecture for our organization? And if you have misaligned architecture for ops, if you have misaligned architecture for development, if like you said, you've got a distributed monolith and a flat structure, right? Where entanglements that you don't intend, they just kind of evolve over time because you haven't had a deliberate exercise of establishing what is the architecture for our organization. What are the words that we use on our organization, and understanding the bounds of each one of those contexts.
And that's a great example as well, how and I reread it again the other day, because Christopher Alexander, who wrote The Timeless Way of Building, which is a classic architecture term. He was a building architect, not a software architect, but the term architecture patterns comes from him. And he passed away recently, and he left behind this treasure trove of books talking about like how you would do dynamic architecture. And that's how really the only way of architecting things. And I think that's such a common dialogue that we have where people are like, if we just architected this properly, and I'm like, you have to be continually architecting.
Thank you.
Like, the timeless way is a mechanism for how you continually evolve your architecture in this space. And that's the same for every part, like operations, development, like all these different teams are continually evolving. And so we almost use architecture the wrong way. We use it in the sense of like this sort of, high modernism where we build a city grid and it's all carefully delineated. And, you're at the corner of 8th and 6th, right? Like that's a very traditional way of looking at software architecture, but it's also like wrong, like flat out wrong.
It's been a long time. Very, very wrong.
But
it's been.
We haven't adjusted to it, like as an industry.
I think it depends. And Neil Ford would say he probably observes there are places where it's wrong, but he wrote evolutionary architecture, right? And architectures themselves should be designed for change, not rigid against change, which is what we did, right? When you had projectized, when you had big waterfall budgets, you built.
I love the way you're using the past tense for these things. It's fantastic.
Yeah, but because I don't believe in that, haven't believed in that in a very, 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 very long time.
Right. But those things are still the majority of most companies.
I had somebody today assert that those weren't problems anymore.
Everything that we talk about is because there's still problems.
He asserted very strongly that those weren't problems anymore.
That's a wild.
That's kind of cray-cray. Little cray-cray. Somebody's a little cray-cray. So, no, I think we have to, just summarizing what we've talked about so far. Words matter for many, many, many reasons. Labeling of individuals with too broad a brushstroke, right? That profiling of those individuals is damaging in many, many ways, whether it is their compensation, whether it is an excitement for what they're about to do, whether it is the misinterpretation of what they're capable and competent to do, right? We're boxing people into too big a thing, we have talked about the words themselves, the definitions mattering when we're talking about concepts that get used as dogma and how damaging dogma is when we're not contextualizing it. Right? That's another piece that's been really important tonight. We had some agreement and some disagreement. Our original conversation was what is ops. WTF is ops. And yes, I tend to not swear, James, too much. Gosh darn it. On here, that
Multiple.
is. On here. Yeah. I have a gutter. Yeah. No, I don't really. I don't. When we talk about, what the heck is ops? Is ops dead? Is DevOps dead? As we poked around the edges of it, what we're finding is that we're seeing people make those statements, this is dead, because they've had an experience and they're seeing other people with similar experiences for whatever reason, and they're declaring it dead because for them it was a failed effort, but it's not dead for everybody. DevOps, it works for many. SRE is a newer term. Google's had it for 10 years, but broad industry is just now really poking up their head. Same thing with value streaming. People are just poking their heads up around it. They are new and awesome concepts and shouldn't be dogma. I was actually brought into a value stream management guild today with a government agency. They brought me in to have a conversation with them. And I was so excited. We made a tiny little survey so they could real time, put their answers out there and we could see the little pie charts moving and see the little things. And it was fun to see how wildly different their views of one organization, how wildly different. And what we got to was we need some better definitions. We need some better definitions. So I'm dry. I'm
dry. Out of coffee.
You're out of coffee. That means you're kind of getting tired too.
Feeling less scrappy.
Having evening coffee. I'm not young enough for that.
Well, like I said, I've not been feeling well today. So,
no. James, if you wanted to leave a message, people fast forward through our entire recording today, and we take one soundbite out that people can walk away, and you want to poke them to think, what might that be, sir?
I think words matter is probably the key one in this space. I do think we're constantly looking for better words for things, and people often feel frustrated because they're not getting that terminology right. They're not getting that pristine dictionary that's, everyone understands and they'll all finally understand me. But I think if you just think of words like error budgets as a mechanism for communication, which is what they're supposed to be, and not like a clear contract of force that you can make people sign and enforce, I think you'll have a lot better time doing all sorts of operations and probably software development as well.
Thank you, James. Bryan, anything you want to kick in before we sign off?
Well, I think near and dear to my heart is you don't get more productive developers by forcing them to work in ways that generate torque. And one of those is either giving them all of the operations of everything, and the other one is stripping away all operational responsibility. That there's balance to life. And if ops can mean many things, but where it means application support, developers should support their applications.
I love it. I love it. We will end up posting out some different quotes, some different links. James, I'm going to have to stay on the line with you and grab some of the different articles and things that you've mentioned today as well. I would leave folks with grace and context. We need to afford everybody grace. And we're all still coming out of these crazy pandemic times. A lot in our industry is changing. Give grace and understand context. Those are for me two of the biggest things. If you like this episode, if you like what you've been hearing about, please hit the like button. Please hit subscribe. Please shoot us messages. Reach out to James directly, myself, Bryan. We want to help you. The whole idea here is to just push people to think a little bit differently and kind of have some fun while you do it. So until next time, James, thank you so much. This is On the Road to
No, thank you.
DevOps.